Welcome back, everyone. This is episode 13 of Building Cybersafe Communities. I'm your host, Ryan Burns, the Director of Cyber Services here at the Risk Pool. And as always, my colleague, Senior Cybersecurity Advisor, Mike Bell. Mike, thanks for joining us again.
Glad to be here.
Good. Hey, so today, special format for today. We've got two special guests from Cowbell Cyber, the cyber carrier for our TML Risk Pool members. We've got two very special guests with us today that are going to provide a lot of insight as to what happens during a cyber claim or a cyber incident. We're calling this Anatomy of a Cyber Incident Response. So I'm going to introduce both of them, then we're going to dive right into the questions. I've got Rebecca Pollack. She's a Senior Cyber Claims Counsel on Cowbell's Cyber Claims team. She's worked in the cyber field for 6 years, both on the claims side and as breach counsel. Prior to joining Cowbell, Rebecca worked for two of the top data privacy and cybersecurity law firms in the country, in addition to working on the privacy legal teams for multiple technology companies. Thanks, Rebecca, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
You bet. And I've also got Joe Hoosech. He is the Principal of Digital Forensics and Incident Response at Cowbell, bringing more than 30 years of leadership and operational experience across various fields, including the U.S. Marine Corps, Department of Defense programs, and cybersecurity. Joe has built and led security operations centers, advisory, and digital forensics and incident response teams, helping organizations respond to ransomware, business email compromise, and other types of cyber incidents. So thank you, Joe, for joining us today as well.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So two experts with us on the call that are going to help us and our members kind of understand what to expect when you incur or a cyber incident does happen. So let's just dive right into the question. So why should a member report an incident as soon as they determine that a cyber claim might arise?
So one of the main reasons, at least from the claim side, that a member would want to notify is under their policy, they have a required time frame that they need to provide notice for coverage to be considered, which for members is 90 days. And so what we typically recommend for our insureds is to, once you discover a claim or a potential claim, that you notify us as soon as possible so that you don't have any notice issues while we're reviewing coverage for your claim, and so that we can provide you with the necessary resources to respond or provide any other assistance that we can.
Yeah, and I'll jump in there from kind of from a technical side. Reporting the incident as soon as possible helps ensure that forensic artifacts and evidence are available. Some artifacts deprecate over time, so we want to make sure we can get in there and get those artifacts and get that evidence as quickly as possible. And the second piece is, depending on the type of incident, is containment, right? Stopping the bleeding, stopping the spread of ransomware, stopping getting the threat actor out of an inbox if it's a business email compromise as quickly as possible.
No, that's good info. I guess just to start dissecting the timeline, when a member calls you to notify you of a cyber incident, what actually happens in the first 24 to 48 hours?
So what that typically looks like from the claim side is that once we receive notice of a member or from a member that a claim has occurred, we'll assign it to one of our adjusters, typically within, if it's a ransomware attack, we'll make sure it's assigned and an adjuster reaches out within an hour of receipt of the notice, just due to the urgency. And for claims that are slightly less time sensitive, we'll still make sure that there's a response and an adjuster assigned that first day that the notice is received. And then once an adjuster is assigned, they'll reach out to the insured directly to find out a time that works best for them to set up an initial intake call, where we'll learn a little bit more about what exactly has happened, determine what resources could be beneficial for them, and then answer any policy questions they have and identify next steps. And then based on that initial intake call, if the member is available to have it within those first 24 to 48 hours, that's typically what we recommend, just so we can get those response efforts started. And assuming we are able to do that and we go through the call and it's determined that it's a business email compromise or ransomware attack, something that needs those additional resources, the Cowbell adjuster will then set up a complimentary consultation for the member with breach counsel and forensics or whoever type of resource is needed there so that they can get those steps going as well.
So what information should the insured have available with them during that initial claim intake call?
So typically, to make it as beneficial as possible for them is we'll ask them to have a general timeline available. So when they discovered the incident, what they've determined has happened so far, any steps they've taken since identifying it. And then also ask that they have the date that they discovered the incident. And for situations where there's like wire fraud involved or some type of social engineering, we'll ask that they have the specific amounts that have been transferred and the date of those transactions as well. And then the last question for cybercrime specifically is that we'll ask them if they have any steps that they took before making the payment to kind of verify the new banking information that they were provided. And that's just helpful information for us to have when we're doing some coverage determinations and looking at their policy afterwards to make sure that all the information that we need to do a thorough analysis is available.
Okay, good. I know there are services available to our members under the policy. Can you explain how those services are assigned and also how they benefit and work alongside the member to help them in recovery?
Yeah, absolutely. So Cowbell has a big panel of vendors who are experts in their field. So for breach counsel or forensics teams, we also have vendors on panel for data mining services and notification services. And those experts are thoroughly vetted. They go through a rigorous process where we make sure they have the right expertise, the right level of knowledge, and we actually do pre-negotiated rates with them as well. So if a member decides to go with our vendors, which is what we typically recommend, they also are getting a pre-negotiated rate. So they're going to be paying less for the same services as if they had gone for either like a non-panel vendor. And so typically once we get the information from that initial call, we'll be able to know which panel vendors would be a good resource for the insureds.
Great.
Yeah, and I'll kind of pile on to that. You know, oftentimes or sometimes the claims team, when they're doing that initial call, they won't get the full scope or understanding of what's really going on. In that initial call, what we call a scoping call, it's typically the data privacy lawyer, breach counsel, and the forensics team. And sometimes the threat actor communications team is on there as well if it's a ransomware and they know they're going to have to do negotiations. But oftentimes we'll figure out during that scoping call, because some of the questions we ask are, you know, from a recovery standpoint, do you have enough personnel on staff or with your MSP to do that, you know, to get up and operational as quickly as possible? And if they say no, then we, you know, make that recommendation to legal to go back to the claims team and say, hey, we need to pull in the restoration and recovery team. So we're kind of that second layer of identifying if an additional vendor is needed or additional services are needed.
Yeah. So these specialized services are typically something that most of our members probably don't have on speed dial, right? So there's a lot of value in what those services are provided under the policy.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So specifically, Rebecca, can you kind of explain the role of legal counsel and the importance of having them involved really early in the process?
Absolutely. Yeah, this is a question we get quite a bit from our insureds and members. So legal counsel's role is kind of twofold. The first is that they really facilitate and manage that incident response process. They go hand in hand with if forensics team is involved, and they'll really go through the entire investigation with an eye to any potential legal obligations that might exist or be triggered for members. And so that you're taking all the necessary steps needed to make sure you're complying with potential legal obligations that exist from the incident. And then the other big role that they play is that they provide a layer of privilege to the forensic investigation and any associated reports that might be populated from that, which is really key later on down the line. Unfortunately, we are seeing companies that are victims, especially of ransomware attacks, receive litigation later on once they've issued notifications. And it definitely doesn't happen with all members, but it's a big enough risk that having the forensic investigation be shaded or covered by this layer of privilege just adds some extra protection in the event that something like that does happen down the road as a result of the incident. We also really recommend including breach counsel in this, just because the breach counsel panel firms that we have on panel all they do day in and day out is work on data security incidents. So they work on hundreds of these incidents a year and just have such extensive experience that having that specialization, they really know what steps to take and what to look out for and any concerns that they can really flag for members before it actually happens. And that is really beneficial for members, just so they're not blindsided later on if something does happen or legal obligations do pop up for them. And they're also really well versed in working with carriers. And so it actually creates kind of like a reprieve for members that they don't have to worry about additional expenses coming up that aren't covered under their policy. Because breach counsel, if they decide notifications are involved, they'll actually reach out to us directly, provide us with a number of quotes for review, and then we'll get those approved before the statement of work is even provided to the member for execution. So it's just an additional thing that they don't have to worry about during such a stressful time, because the breach counsel panel just know how to do that process with us. And then the last benefit that I see is kind of what I had mentioned before, that there are pre-negotiated rates. So it actually ends up being cheaper for our insureds and our members, because they're paying these within their deductible, or if God forbid it end up exceeding their aggregate limit of liability for their policy, they're paying lower than market rate. So it actually ends up saving them money as well.
Yeah, good.
So Joe, we get this question from our members a lot, and that is, what kind of information should they have available that would help facilitate the incident response process?
That's a good question. I'll get up on my soapbox here and start preaching. And I mentioned it before. The kind of the initial stage from the technical side and the legal side is that scoping call. All too often we get on a scoping call and we have the CFO on who's trying to explain to us what happened and has no technical understanding of what happened or can answer any of the technical questions. And they're not very technical questions that we ask during that call. So I think one of the first things is having the right people on that scoping call. If you've got internal IT folks, or you have an MSP that's providing your IT support, having somebody that can talk to the technical side of the incident is key to us being able to jump in right away and start handling it. And even prior to that, it's things like an incident response plan, a business continuity plan, a disaster recovery plan. Those are things that should be established today for the when, not if this happens. And you need to exercise those plans, right? Do a tabletop exercise, annual, because those are living, breathing documents that should be updated. You should do an a tabletop exercise of your incident response plan and get all your key members around the table, go through a scenario, see what worked, what didn't in that scenario, because you don't want to find out during the actual incident what's not working. And you want all the key stakeholders to understand what their responsibilities are. Backups, making sure, so from some of the technical things to have available, network diagrams, asset inventories, and with that asset inventory, identify business critical systems, right? Because that's where you want to focus your effort. And when your house is on fire, You don't want to be looking for the hose. You want to know where the hose is. You want to be, you know, where the faucet is. You know, if the hose isn't hooked up to the faucet, at least know where both of them are at so that you can start putting the fire out. Um, um, Authorized application should be another part of that asset inventory. What's authorized, what's not authorized? Because oftentimes when we get in to do the digital forensics piece of the investigation, it's understanding what tools and what applications the business uses and what they don't. When, you know, oftentimes we'll find an application and we have to go back and say, hey, do you guys use this application? And we wait days for somebody to say, oh yeah, we use that, or no, we don't use that. So knowing what's authorized and what's not authorized, and backups, know where your backups are at, know where your business critical backups are at. The current state of them would be nice to know during the scoping call, whether they're, you know, whether they've been affected or not. And from a business standpoint, you know, part of the business continuity plan and disaster recovery plan is how long does it restore? How long does it take to restore from those backups? Oftentimes we get into a situation where the IT folks know they have good backups, but they don't know how long it's going to take to recover from those backups. And the leadership is going, well, why is it taking 4 days? It's because the IT folks didn't know it was going to take 6 days to recover from those backups.
Yeah, and I bet that's a long 4 days while you're waiting for that disk to write.
Yeah, because the leadership's asking about every hour, when are we going to be up and operational?
Yeah, those are great points. Thanks for that, Joe. So flipping to the other side of the coin, though, what steps in the incident response process might members miss that could impact coverage for certain expenses?
So the biggest thing that we see insureds and members miss is not getting approval for costs or specific vendors before engaging them. Something that we always really emphasize to insureds on that initial intake call is that under the policy, for expenses to be covered, they have to be pre-approved. And so that even includes like involving their MSP or any initial response efforts that they're taking, making sure that they are getting our approval and letting us know, providing that statement of work. Another piece to that is sometimes we see insureds take a lot of steps and involve like their MSP before even providing notice of an incident. And that's always a really hard conversation to have because we understand the urgency of needing to identify what's going on and determine what happened. And for a lot of insureds, they're like, oh, well, this will tell me if I need to provide notice of a claim or not. And unfortunately, that approval really does apply even to those types of expenses as well. It's really hard to get a retroactive approval for something like that. And so these expenses that had they notified us and provide the statement of work ahead of time and could have likely been covered end up being, unfortunately, an out-of-pocket expense for the insured. And that also comes up if they're suffering from something like a ransomware attack where they have to replace equipment or pieces that were damaged and unusable from the ransomware attack. And typically, unless it's being provided like from a panel provided or panel approved like forensics team and it's part of their response efforts, we need to be providing them with approval of any like hardware and equipment expenses as well. And kind of along those lines, for claims where an insured does have a litigation piece to it, we've seen some insureds in the past actually go through settlement, identify, and then come to us afterwards like, hey, we had this claim and we already settled, so we just need to get reimbursed for this money. And unfortunately there, because we weren't involved in that settlement, and it has to be approved, that those also end up not being approved as well. And I think the last thing that insureds, especially when it comes to a cybercrime loss, tend to miss that can really impact their coverage is more of something that happens before they file the claim. And it's not taking a step to authenticate new banking instructions that they're provided using a method other than what they were provided them in. So if they get an email providing new banking information, that they don't take those extra couple minutes and verbally call whoever provided it to confirm that those are legitimate changes that need to be made. Under their policy, that's a required component for a social engineering attack to be covered. And it's something that we see insureds kind of frequently miss. And so we always try to flag that for them. So at least in the future, they can make those changes in whatever their internal payment processes are.
Good.
Yeah, and I was, when you asked the question, the first thing that came to my mind was that the carrier approvals, just making sure, vendors that are used are, any statements of work or engagement letters are approved prior to that work starting, just to make sure that carrier is approving those ahead of time.
Yeah, I think that just reinforces the need to contact you and contact us as quickly as possible in the process. Even if you think it might not rise to the level of a claim, it doesn't hurt to let us know that early. So that reinforces that. Thank you.
That's good stuff. There's different types of incidents that can occur, but two of the most common that Ryan and I see from our members are related to cybercrime are business email compromise and ransomware. What steps should members take once they discover a potential cybercrime loss that often goes overlooked?
So specific to cybercrime losses, typically one of the first couple questions that we'll ask in that initial intake call is if they've contacted their bank and if they've provided some type of law enforcement notification. And they say more often than I am they say no more often than I am anticipating. And so typically, in addition to providing notice to the carrier, just even if they're unclear at this time if the funds are recoverable or not, we always recommend that they immediately contact their bank. Something that, unless you're in the industry, you're not as aware of is banks typically, if you don't provide them notice within 72 hours, it immediately becomes 100 times harder to get your money back. Because at that point, it's either been withdrawn or the transaction has already fully been completed. And then you're working with both your bank and the receiving bank. And it just makes a lot more challenges. And so we always recommend reaching out to your bank, even in situations where it has been a couple weeks, just to make sure you're covering all your bases. Because every once in a while, the bad actor will forget that they have funds in their account and haven't actually withdrawn it yet. And so you could get lucky potentially. And then we also really recommend filing a report with the FBI. They have an Internet Crime Complaint Center that's dedicated to cybercrime attacks that happen. And it's a really easy form to fill out. And we always recommend that insureds file that as well. We see a lot of insureds file local police reports, which is also a really good first step. We just find that they tend to have a lot fewer resources to provide insureds in terms of actually trying to get funds back or identifying the bad actors who were involved.
Yeah, and I think from a technical standpoint, you talked about the two common things we're seeing, right? Business email compromises and ransomware. From the technical standpoint, for BEC, it's kicking the threat actor out. As soon as you think something's going on, it's changing the user password, it's ending all, the sessions, revoking session tokens, resetting MFA. Hopefully MFA was enabled. If it wasn't enabled, let's that's a good time to go ahead and enable MFA on that specific account, that specific user account. But with a BEC, it's resetting that account so we can get the threat actor out, and I usually call it stop the bleeding. From a ransomware perspective, it's several steps, right? As soon as you realize something's going on, it's isolating systems, right? I'm taking drastic measures. I'm running around. I'm pulling LAN cables out. Or disabling wireless network connectivity, right? Because I want to isolate every system on the network. I want containment. I want the stop of the ransomware or the ransomware to stop spreading. I'm pulling or exporting firewall logs, VPN logs. Those are typically the two logs that we see being the most volatile logs, as in, local devices only store so much, a certain amount of those logs, and then they're overwritten. So immediately, exporting, pulling firewall, VPN logs, or any other potentially volatile logs that you may have in your environment. I'm not shutting systems down if possible. What you don't want to do is you don't want to stop encryption by shutting down a system, powering off a system if encryption is partway through, because if you find out your backups aren't any good, that the threat actor got your backups too, disrupting that encryption will likely render that system dead, unrecoverable, and you'll have to start from scratch on that one.
Those are some great recommendations. I appreciate all those steps. When responding to the ransomware attack example, what types of activities or documentation should a member be keeping track of to make the business interruption extra expense claim loss submission process easier?
So there's a handful of things that we usually look for business interruption extra expense claims. We actually typically involve forensic accountants in that process, just because they can really dive into the numbers and the financial piece much better than we can. And typically what we hear from them, and that tracks with what our policy requirements are during the response efforts. Most people are putting in lots of extra hours. They're not working on their own work, and making sure that, especially for hourly employees, that you're tracking the amount of time that the employees are working specifically on response efforts, whether that be in data recovery or having to rebuild things, make manual workarounds, any kind of like additional work they have to provide related to the ransomware attack, is making sure you're tracking that and tracking what their hourly rates are. So that once you're submitting the claim, you can try and get reimbursement for those payroll costs and those overtime costs. And then also any potential hardware or equipment that needs to be purchased. Typically, we will already be aware of it because of the approval process that goes into place with those. But I typically recommend still keeping track of all of that, so that if something does come up or something was missed, that it can still be submitted for consideration. And then the last thing we recommend is really tracking lost sales while you were inoperable, and making sure that they're keeping track of how much money they are losing over that time. For the business interruption and extra expense, business income loss is like a really big key component to that. And so the forensic accountants like to see the numbers around like what was lost during that recovery period, and they assess it compared to like what were sales during that time last year. Were they able to recover any of those funds or any of those sales after the incident? And so being able to track that information while the incident is happening just makes their insured's lives so much easier when they're trying to collect everything to provide for the business interruption extra expense claim for consideration.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, we see having conversations after the fact when people have these types of incidents, that's something that's overlooked pretty commonly. They forget to track those types of things. So kind of along those same lines, I mean, what are some other surprises that you see organizations have about the cyber claims process as a whole?
Yeah, I think the main ones that I see, there's three main ones in addition to kind of missing some of those documentation tracking as they go on, are the timely notice component, and being surprised that there are so many resources available to them that could make that process, the response process, easier. In addition to just making sure that notice is being provided even when an insured isn't 100% sure if a claim has even occurred. The worst case scenario for insureds, if they come to us and like, oh, actually, it turns out this didn't end up being a claim, we got our money back, we can withdraw the claim for them. And so for me, I'm always highly recommending, it's like, even if you think there could be a claim, definitely provide notice so that we can confirm and provide any resources that you need. Because we see a lot that insureds feel like they need to provide notice only when they're 100% sure that a claim existed. And knowing that they can provide that notice and get those resources before they're even 100% is something that we usually recommend. And I'm surprised that or not super surprised, but it's something we see a lot from our insureds. And then also the approval component. I find that insureds are always really surprised at how many approvals they need from the carrier for expenses to be approved and what those timeframes usually look like.
Yeah.
And once they're aware, insureds are always like, oh yeah, this makes sense. This is fantastic. But because you're going through something that's really stressful, it's never something that's necessarily like front of mind for insureds. And so making sure that they're aware that like the approvals need to come so we can make sure we're getting as much covered as possible for them under their policy. And then I think the last surprise that I see for insureds throughout this process is the emphasis we put on hiring, when necessary, hiring like vendors specifically from our panel to provide them with assistance. A lot of insureds have really good relationships with like their MSPs or their own legal counsel. And because they haven't necessarily gone through this process before, I think that those vendors have like the necessary information and knowledge to really quarterback situations like this. And they're always surprised to find out that there are law firms that all they do day in and day out is work on data security incidents. Same with forensics firms, that this is their whole job is to work on these. And they actually can do a really good job working with the MSPs or an insured's legal counsel and keeping them involved and really kind of like tag teaming that and making sure that there's no conflict between all of the vendors while they're trying to get the insured back online. And that's usually, I see insureds be surprised at how highly we are recommending these panel vendors. But I think, I'm not sure I've seen an insured be upset that they ended up going with those vendors for response efforts in the end.
Yeah. So this has been super, super helpful. I think for our members to not only kind of have a better understanding of what to expect when a cyber incident happens, but also to understand how valuable the resources that the policy provides them, these specialized services to help them stop the incident, recover from the incident, and get back up and running. And Mike and I kind of see our mission in what we do daily is to educate people not only on this, but educate them on how to avoid something from happening to begin with. So I think let's wrap up with one final question. I think this was the one we really want to take away is what do you think are the most important steps that our members could take right now to not only maybe help them prevent an incident from even happening, but if an incident does happen, help them reduce the disruption time to as small as possible, but help them speed up recovery as much as they can? What are some key things they can focus on right now?
Yeah, and that's a good wrap-up question, right? And I kind of hit on these before, but it's having a good, well thought out, up-to-date incident response plan, business continuity plan, disaster recovery plan, training to those plans, doing annual tabletops, making sure that people know their roles, making sure that when somebody leaves, who's a key stakeholder in the incident response plan, that the next person up is, that they're plugged into that plan. There's not a gap in that role. Having those network diagrams, the system inventory and application inventory, and then on that inventory, earmarking the business critical systems and business critical applications. Again, that just speeds up that recovery time. And immutable backups, right? And testing those backups and knowing where your business critical backups are at, and knowing how long it takes to recover from those backups. I think those, and I'll kind of lump those into three categories, right? Of the plans, the diagrams, and inventories, and then backups, and having those three things solidly available will aid that organization. And I'll go back to the incident response plan just real quickly. Having a good incident response plan means having it printed out in a 3-ring binder on a file cabinet in your office or in a desk drawer or somewhere. Because if you've got hit, if it's a ransomware incident and your systems are down, you don't have access to it. So having it printed out somewhere, will help you out.
Yeah, those are key points. Mike and I talk about this with members all the time, and I like to say, if we ask a member, do you have an incident response plan? If they don't know the answer to that question, the answer is no. That means they
That's
have
right.
not been involved in the response plan, because it's an organizational response. It's not an IT responsibility. It's not an IT response. It's a business operations response. So I think those are some key points. Mike and I, our team, we can help our members with these types of things, incident response planning, help them with business continuity. We can do risk assessments that help them identify those gaps. The first thing that always pops up in our risk assessments, Mike, is what?
Inventory. Hardware
Inventory every
inventory.
single time. So to
Yeah.
hear us
Yeah.
say it is one thing, but to hear the experts on the other side say it again helps drive that point home. So the information that you both provided today, I think, is going to be invaluable to our members. I do want to point out a couple of things. Number one, if you like our content, please like and subscribe to our channel. Please send us emails letting us know. Positive feedback only, please. We don't do well with criticism. No, I'm joking. But if you have other ideas for content, we'd love to hear it, because we want to make sure this is valuable. Cybersquad at tmlirp.org. Email is here flashed on the screen. The main thing I want to make sure everybody understands is, if you do suspect you have an incident occurring, please contact Cowbell as quickly as possible. They have a staffed 24/7 hotline. That number is 833-633-8666. Number here on the screen also. You can also email them at claims@cowbellcyber.ai. They will answer the phone 24/7, respond quickly, because the quicker we can get notice, the quicker we can get on the phone with you, the quicker the response happens, the easier the process goes. And that's what we're trying to accomplish if we get to the point of an incident. So thank you both for joining us. I think it's been very, very valuable. Any last minute things to say before we wrap up?
I don't think so. I just appreciate you having me on today. This was great conversation.
Yeah, likewise. Yeah, appreciate the opportunity to talk to your folks. Always like to I'd rather them be well prepared than ill prepared.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well
I
said.
think preparedness is a big part of what we're trying to instill in our members. So we're hopeful that they can engage with us early and often. No offense to you all, so they don't have to engage with you after the fact, right? But it's also nice to know that safety net is there to help them if something were to occur. And what we're seeing now is, it's really not a matter of if, it's almost a matter of when, because it's becoming so common and so frequent. We want to keep it, as contained and as minimal as possible. So thank you both. We've enjoyed the conversation. If, like I said, email us with any questions or comments, and then we will see you next time on the next episode of Building Cybersafe Communities. Thank you.